Good evening. Welcome to Lightning Talks. I'm Jim Wharton. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the Vice President for Conservation Engagement and Learning here at the Aquarium. The Seattle Aquarium is located on the shores of Puget Sound in the traditional and contemporary territories of the Coast Salish people. Thank you for joining us tonight from wherever you call home. Now, our topic tonight is cephalopods, a group of animals that includes octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish. So why not just say octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish? Well, because cephalopod is a really cool word, and it says a lot about this evening's featured creatures. Now, cephalo means head. Octopuses and their kin are the most intelligent invertebrates on Earth, and in fact, smarter than many small mammals, probably including and especially my cat. Now, pod means foot or appendages, and cephalopods have plenty of those as well. In fact, octopus appendages are intelligent, independent of their brains. more on that later. Now, the way that cephalopods work is so strange and so specialized, it's led to outrageous theories about their interstellar origins. But it's no exaggeration to think of them as astonishing aliens of inner space. And as usual, we have 5 great speakers tonight to tell you more. If you've never been to a Lightning Talks event, this is what you have in store. 5 speakers have 5 minutes each to share one big idea and not 1 second more. They'll get warnings at 1 minute. They'll get another at 30 seconds. And then finally at time. And if they go over, they get this. Now, we like to keep things moving tonight, so we won't be stopping for questions between each speaker. But at the end of the evening, we'll have all of our speakers back to the Lightning Talk stage for a Q&A conversation. Now, if you enjoy tonight's event and would like to see more things like Lightning Talks, please do consider a donation to the Seattle Aquarium. When you donate to the Seattle Aquarium, you're joining us in our mission to inspire conservation of our marine environment. And if you haven't yet, please do click like and subscribe. Now, it's a great program tonight, and as usual, I'm super excited to get moving. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, C.E. O'Brien. Now, C.E. is a behavioral ecologist that specializes in cephalopods and works at the School 4 Field Studies in Turks and Caicos Islands. Now, one of the drawbacks of living in paradise is that sometimes your internet is a little on the unreliable side. So we'll be enjoying CE's recorded talk. Then they will join us afterwards for the Q&A. So let's get things started.
Wild. And that is what I'm going to talk about and show you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. C.E. O'Brien, and I'm a marine behavioral ecologist specializing in the study of cephalopods, particularly octopuses. Now, a lot of what we know about octopuses comes from observations and experiments that have been conducted in controlled laboratory settings. But in my work, I study octopus behavior in the wild, and that is what I'm going to talk about and show you a bit of here. Now, one really useful feature about octopuses to help in their study is the fact that they usually pick a hole or a shell or some other sort of crevice or shelter to serve as a den for several days to weeks to months. They also have a tendency to scatter food outside of this den and collect things like rocks and other objects, which makes it a little bit easier to find them, and also incidentally inspired Ringo Starr's Octopus's Garden. The fact that they live in the den also makes it easier to track the same individual over time and allows us to place remote cameras that enable us to spy on the octopus's activity. Octopuses will leave their den a couple times a day or night in order to hunt for things like fish, crabs, shrimp, and other animals. They have 2 primary methods of hunting. The first we see in this video is groping, in which they basically reach into every crack and crevice they can find in order to try and grab the prey living there. Occasionally, we also see them pounce on a rock or a coral head and envelop it with their arms and the webbing between their arms. And this is an attempt to trap all of the prey that was living inside in their arm web. This is called the parachute attack. Now, as they hunt, octopuses are often followed by fishes hoping to nab any prey that happens to escape from the octopuses. And most of the time, the octopus seems relatively unbothered by this. However, as we see in this video, a fish occasionally gets a little too close for comfort, and the octopus will actually lash out and punch the offender. Now, octopuses are predators, but they also have predators of their own, things like sharks and rays, and also moray eels, like the one with really bad aim that we see here. A lot of the octopuses that we see in the wild are actually missing arms or in the process of regrowing an arm, and that's because one of their escape mechanisms is to release an arm if they are attacked. in order to serve as a diversion as they escape. Another way that octopuses defend themselves is to hide in holes or crevices in the substrate or the sand or any habitat that they happen to be in. They have almost no hard parts to their body, and this enables them to fit into almost any crack imaginable, so they can easily escape. Octopuses also have a kind of superpower in that they can jet propel themselves away from danger. And as they do so, they often release ink, which serves as a mask of their escape or a decoy as it hangs in the water column. You're probably also aware of octopus's ability to change their appearance on a very rapid basis. So in this video, we see two of the functions of this ability. At the beginning of the video, the octopus was relatively well camouflaged against the background, perhaps looking like a rock or a coral head. But when it sees me and realizes that I'm watching, it immediately changes its appearance, trying to appear as large and threatening as possible. The final thing I'll talk about is octopus's ability to mimic objects in their environment. On the video on the left, we see an octopus running bipedally across the seafloor, presumably attempting to imitate a piece of algae rolling in the surf, like we see in the video on the right. I hope you enjoyed my highlight reel of octopus behavior in the wild. Thank you for listening, and thanks to these people and entities for making my research possible.
Thanks, CE. A guaranteed way to make it inside the timing limit is to go with the recorded presentation for sure. There is such an incredible variety of strategies for protecting themselves. It's kind of mind-boggling. The one that's jumping to mind though, it is the whole fish punching thing. I think that got a lot of attention a while back about octopuses punching fish out of spite. Like, is the octopus just trying to get the fish out of their hunting area? What's going on there?
Yeah, essentially when a fish gets too close or the octopus thinks it might steal its food, it'll lash out and try and get them to go away.
Yeah, I'm sure we've probably all met fish that deserved it. So I get it.
We're siblings.
We're siblings. Well, thank you so much, CE. CE will be back at the end of the evening for the Q&A. So please do remember to put your questions and comments for CE into the chat. Please do that all evening long. If you have questions, things you'd like to share, things you're curious about, drop those into the chat. We're collecting them all for the Q&A at the end of the evening. Thanks again, CE. Our next speaker for the Lightning Talk stage is Kate Stanley. Kate is an aquarist here at the Fish and Invertebrates team at the Seattle Aquarium. Kate's going to tell us a little bit more about how we keep those hyper-intelligent octopuses in our care mentally stimulated. Kate, are you ready to tell us more?
I totally am.
All right. Take it away.
Okay, guys. So like Jim said, I'm here to talk to you guys about octopus enrichment, why it's important, and how we do it at the Seattle Aquarium. So to start, what is enrichment? Enrichment, and the primary goal of it, is to provide an opportunity for the animal to satisfy their behavioral needs, optimize their level of mental stimulation, and create a rich and variable environment for the individuals under our care. And that's important because when they are in human care, there's a lot less changes they have to go through. As CE talked about in the talk before me, they don't have natural predators when they're under our care. They don't have to deal with as many changes in their environment, such as tidal changes, and we are giving them their food, so they don't necessarily have to go out and hunt for it. By providing enrichment, we're kind of giving them the opportunity to perform those natural behaviors they would do. So on the slide, you can see on the left is a picture of actually one of our octopus performing that parachute behavior that CE talked about. In the middle is one of our puzzle feeders we give them, and I'll go into more detail about that in a second. And then to the right is a picture of one of our husbandry divers cleaning the exhibit and allowing one of our octopus to kind of interact with them and explore what we are doing. So, how do we accomplish our goal? We accomplish that goal of enriching our individuals by having a schedule we follow. We enrich them at least 3 times a week. We might enrich them more than that. We might even enrich them multiple times a day. It really just depends on the individuals in our care. We also split our enrichment into categories to make sure that we're kind of following that variable environment that we want to create for them. So the categories that we have, there are 5. The first one is habitat. That might be when we change the flow in their exhibit to maybe act as like an example of tidal change. We might decrease their water level, that they have to like figure out where to go. We might even change the lighting they experience. That would be different from the day-to-day that we provide them. We also give them devices, which is anything that that individual can kind of manipulate and explore. We also have sensory enrichment, which could be an ice treat made of fish juices, or it could be a texture that they don't have access to every day. Another one we do is feeding enrichment, which is where we would give them a puzzle feeder and we hide the food in it and the animal has to manipulate it or figure out how to open it to get to their food. That also might just be us hiding food around their exhibit where they have to go look through the rocks like they would in the wild to figure out where we've hidden those food items. And then the last one we have is behavior enrichment, which is where as caregivers for them, we allow them to kind of explore our hands and our arms. If they are on an exhibit at the aquarium, they get to interact with our staff divers. So our husbandry cleaning dives also have that kind of secondary benefit of also providing enrichment for our individuals. Whenever we provide enrichment, we also record it all to make sure that we are kind of looking at how the different individuals either like enrichment, maybe they don't like it. It's still enriching for them, whether they like it or not. And it also kind of shows us maybe we tend to do one type of enrichment too much and we can make sure to kind of change that in the future. And we also have lots and lots of options for the individuals. So one of the pictures on this slide is actually a picture of our back of house storage for our different enrichment items. But keep in mind, enrichment is not always an item. It could just be, light that we do. Here on this slide is examples of enrichment we have. So you can see a few of them is our octopus interacting with our cleaning husbandry tools. The top left one is our saltwater shower that we provide, and that can also cause our individuals to start grooming themselves and to remove all those sucker molts off of their arms. And then a few of those pictures are also our puzzle feeders that we provide them that they have to open. And then this last slide is a kind of transition of one of our individuals. We put a crab in here and they actually decided to go physically through the box instead of just pulling the crab out. It's one of my favorite things that I watched in the last few months, one of our individuals doing. And that's all I got.
That was great, Kate. Thank you so much. You might have already answered this, but the first thing that came to mind that I was curious about is like, do you have a favorite enrichment experience? Like something maybe you designed yourself that you put in there and they really, really got them moving and thinking? Like what's been your best experience?
Honestly, I think my best experience was probably that last one, just because so many of our individuals will just like grab the crab out or they'll open up one of those sides. But in that picture transition, that individual actually decided to go through the box, which is something that even our more experienced staff members hadn't seen in like the past 4 years.
I love that. Octopus creativity.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Kate. Again, Kate will be back at the end of the evening. So I've seen questions coming in. Thank you all for doing that. Keep those questions coming so we have a nice, robust list for the end of the evening. Our next speaker is Aditi Pophale from the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. Aditi is a PhD student in computational neuroethology who spends a lot of time watching cephalopods sleep, which isn't creepy at all. So, Aditi, are you ready to explain yourself?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. So today I'm going to tell you about what octopus skin can tell us about the mystery of sleep. So my name is Aditi and I'm a PhD student in the computational neuroethology unit. So we use AI and deep neural networks and neuroscience techniques to study animal behavior. So that's computational neuroethology. And the mystery of sleep begins with the observation that all animals we've observed sleep, from simple jellyfish to single-cell hydra to migratory birds are known to sleep while they're flying. Penguins in the Antarctic sleep. So every animal has found a way to sleep. So it's a biologically ubiquitous phenomenon. But this begs the question, what is sleep exactly and how we're defining it? So if you look at the brain while it's asleep, you can see that there are at least two distinct stages of sleep. Non-REM, characterized with slow, synchronous brain activity. That is, all the neurons fire together and then they go quiet together. And rapid eye movement sleep. So this state is characterized by eye movements, but the brain looks like it's awake, even though the person or the animal in this case is behaviorally asleep. So neuroscientists still don't know why sleep is divided into these particular stages and why we need this particular sleep architecture and how this relates to our awake experiences. So far, only vertebrates have shown the evidence of these two distinct stages of sleep. But we decided to look at this phenomenon in cephalopods. So we're generally familiar with an octopus's ability to change its skin color and texture for camouflage or signaling or whatever they need to do. But the reason why they're able to change their appearance so quickly is because their skin is controlled by neurons. So what you have on the cephalopod skin is a readout of their neural activity. So we can use this extremely unique property of octopus skin to investigate one of the biggest mysteries in neuroscience, sleep. So to do this, we use the small Okinawan octopus called Octopus laqueus. It's nocturnal, so it walks around during the night, and during the day, it sits in this little pot, lies flat and smooth, and every hour it goes through this series of color and texture changes accompanied by eye movements and sucker movements. So we did a whole bunch of behavioral and neural recordings to show that the octopus is actually in a REM-like sleep now. So if you look at the brain at this point, it looks like the animal is awake, but actually it's behaviorally asleep. So to get into this, to understand these patterns more, we did high-resolution recording. So now you're looking at the octopus from the top, and you have a complete view of the patterns on the mantle. So using this kind of a view, we can then use deep neural networks to analyze and quantify these patterns to see what they're all about. So what we found was that the active sleep is not the same every time. There are a few patterns that are shared across octopuses, but each octopus has its own unique signature style of doing these active sleep patterns, which was unexpected and really strange. Then we wanted to see whether these patterns are just something they do in sleep, or is it somehow related to the patterns that they do during wakefulness. So here you have patterns you see during active sleep and during wakefulness, and you see there is a good match between the patterns you see in both these states. Here you have a wave of chromatophore activity that starts at the mantle tip and goes all the way down the body of the octopus, both in active sleep, wakefulness, and in the wild. So we wanted to see whether these patterns also appear in the wild. So you see these black lines between the arms which appear when the animal is swimming. So what we find is that octopuses do have a replay of the pattern of their skin patterns during wakefulness and sleep. So what we can learn from this is that REM-like sleep evolved at least twice into very different groups. And we can look at the commonalities between these groups, large nervous system, complex behaviors, and convergent evolution of our eyes to figure out why we sleep like this. And it's kind of cool that we share this very basic biology with octopuses. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those videos they're so cool. Like watching those patterns kind of wash over the octopus while they're sleeping. I mean, this is an intelligent animal and it's in REM sleep. Is it too much of a jump to suppose that they're dreaming?
I don't. This is a common question, but we can't be too sure, right? Because our visual experience of the dream is something we can't even share between humans. We don't have a good measurement on that. So I can't tell you what it's imagining, but it looks like it.
That's amazing. It just feels like you're at the very, very, very beginning of this work and that there's so much more to learn. That's super exciting. Well, thank you for sharing that with us this evening. I've seen a ton of questions. I've already seen so many questions. I know that we're not going to get to them all this evening, but I'm excited to get to the Q&A. Thank you again, Aditi. She will be back again for the Q&A. Our next speaker is Meg Mindlin. Meg is a graduate student at Walla Walla University studying how climate change phenomena like ocean acidification are impacting the evolution of cephalopods. Are you ready to tell us more, Meg?
I so am.
Excellent. Floor is yours.
All right. Well, today I'm going to be talking to you about RNA editing, a molecular process in cephalopods that allows them to edit and change their proteins without having to change their DNA. And now while I say octopuses, this process actually also occurs in squid and cuttlefish as well. Oh, it's not changing. Okay, so to start to understand RNA editing, we're going to first need to understand what RNA is. No. And to give you a little science lesson, DNA is what provides your body with the code to make everything that makes up you, you. You can think of it sort of as like a blueprint for yourself. So if DNA is your blueprint, RNA is like the step-by-step guide on how exactly to make you, you. And what makes you, you are your proteins. When we are talking about genetic mutation, we mostly are talking about changes to your DNA. RNA editing, however, is specifically making changes to your RNA right before your RNA is going to be made into proteins. And why I'm talking to you today about this process is because while lots of other animals do RNA editing, including us, nobody else does it to the extent that the cephalopods do. And if we look at RNA editing sites throughout animals, we can see that there's really not a lot of them up until the point where we get to cephalopods, where we see a drastic increase in the amount of sites. So cephalopods are using this process far more than any other animal. And so where is this happening? What is going on? Well, this is happening primarily in their neural tissues, so their brain, and the RNA is being edited by an enzyme called ADAR, which is sometimes triggered by temperature. The effect is that the edited protein has slightly modified functionality, which leads to various different versions of the same protein. So how does this actually work? Well, like I said, RNA editing is facilitated by a group of enzymes called ADAR, and here I have ADAR portrayed as a giant Pacific octopus, and he is going to be swapping out this A nucleotide for an I nucleotide. Now, nucleotides are just what DNA and RNA is made up of, and we sometimes call them our building blocks of life. So you may be thinking to yourself now, what's one letter? That can't create that much change. But it really does. Proteins are made up of amino acid, which is what the RNA is coding for. And switching only one nucleotide can actually lead to an entirely new amino acid being included in the step-by-step protein guide. So in this example, I've only changed the last nucleotide from an A to a G, which results in two entirely different amino acids, one being methionine and the other being isoleucine. So cephalopods are modifying their proteins through RNA editing. What's the result of this? Well, this means that cephalopods have options. Because they are editing their RNA and not their DNA, these edits can sometimes be temporary. And editing their RNA also gives them a lot of flexibility because they can choose which version of a protein better fits their environment. And also, these changes occur quickly, much faster than it would take to edit your DNA. So we've actually seen some of these edits occur within 24 hours. So if they're editing their RNA, how does this then affect their evolution if these changes aren't permanent? Because these edited proteins are sticking around for the ceph to choose from, that takes up a lot of space and resources to maintain all of these structures, which leaves their DNA with very little resources to mutate. So employing RNA editing is actually slowing down their DNA evolution. Okay, so their evolution is slowed down, but what about climate change? Well, lab studies show that too hot of temperature and too acidic of water is detrimental for cephalopods' reproduction and development. But the picture is a lot more complex than this, because fish, which are cephalopods' main competitors, are much more affected by climate change than cephalopods. So as fish populations go down because of overfishing and changing oceans, we're actually seeing cephalopod populations going up. So why is this? Well, this is what we're just beginning to understand, and we think RNA editing may be one of these underlying mechanisms that are attributing to their survival in the face of change. And while there are studies that show that cephs won't do well in the future, how the cards will fall depends on a lot of different factors. And ultimately, we can only predict so much, and predictions can change, which is why it's so important to vote, because not only can change happen and will happen if we implement policy and laws to protect our oceans by electing people who care about our planet, not only voting at the federal level, but state and local level, we can see change. And this will help save the cephalopods and also save the world for our future generations. I have totally gone over limit, but thank you so much for your time, and I hope you learned some new things about molecular biology.
You totally did go over time. Like
I
close.
totally
It was
did.
really
I
close.
totally
It was
did.
just like, it's not, is it worth the lightning? I don't know. The
Yeah.
So I saw the question come in, and I think it's a good clarification. We think of DNA changes and through evolution over time as randomized changes.
Mhm.
You've got the octopus in there switching out proteins. Is RNA editing an intentional thing that a cephalopod is doing, or is it something that is happening that the cephalopod is either benefiting or not benefiting from?
It is something that's just happening. So they're not like actually out there mixing around their RNA and making these little changes. It's something that's just going to be triggered, and we're seeing it being triggered by temperature changes, so like colder water. But there's also going to be a lot of other environmental factors that are going to trigger these edits, and we're really only at just the beginning of this research. So there's a lot that we still don't know.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like it gives them a little more flexibility than maybe some of the other animals that don't have as many sites available to them.
Oh, totally, because they're totally reliant on DNA mutations, which that's too slow. It's too slow.
Well, thank you so much, Meg. Meg will be back later in the evening for our Q&A. So you know the drill by now. Please do put your questions and comments into the chat. And I cannot believe it, but we are at our final speaker of the evening, and that is Chelsea Bennice. Chelsea is a postdoctoral research fellow at Florida Atlantic University. She spent more than 1,000 hours underwater photographing, and studying cephalopods, including the mysterious mimic octopus. I'm so excited to hear more. Are you ready to bring us home?
I'm ready. Thanks, Jim. All right, thanks everyone for joining. Let's dive right in and talk about the marvelous mimic octopuses. So octopuses and their relatives have magical skin. They're covered in these color-changing cells known as chromatophores and reflective cells known as iridophores and leucophores. This allows the octopus to change its color of skin in less than 1 second. This skin color, texture, and behavior is very important for octopuses and their primary defense against predators, also known as camouflage. Now, the goal here is don't look like a tasty treat or don't look like an octopus. Different types of camouflage include background matching, where the octopus can blend into its environment, disruptive coloration, where the octopus uses high contrast light and dark colors to break up its body outline and motion camouflage. This motion camouflage that the octopus uses, it may look like an animal, this is known as mimicry, or it may look like an object, like the moving rock trick, or floating seaweed, and this is known as masquerade. Octopuses have many predators, and a lot of those predators have excellent vision, and this has led to the octopuses to be the masters of disguise. There's a unique group of octopuses known as long-armed sand octopuses, or lasso for short. They live in a sandy habitat, they're active during the daytime, and they're relatively small octopuses. However, they have extremely long arms about or longer than 6.5 times their mantle length, or ML. The visibility to predators, either being in a sandy habitat or being active during the daytime, has possibly led to the lasso's visual illusions, and they might be playing tricks on you. There's actually 5 different species or types of octopus you see on this screen. We're going to start with the Indo-Pacific octopus and figure out who's who over there. We're going to start off and leave out of South Florida, where I'm located, go all the way to Indonesia, where we have our first octopus. This is the mimic octopus, and it's known to mimic up to 13 different species. However, it's well documented that it mimics the flatfish or flounder and also the banded sea snake. Next up is wonderpus. So these two octopus look very similar, but with the mimic octopus, you can see that it has a white outline around its suckers, which wonderpus does not. This animal is also known to use the banded sea snake mimicry, and sometimes it will swim up in the water column at the end of this video and look like a lionfish. However, sometimes it swims up in the water column and just drifts down, and it looks really, really bizarre. But remember, the goal is just don't look like an octopus. The third octopus here is the white V octopus, and this octopus has yet to be fully described, so it doesn't have a scientific name. It's called the white V octopus because of the white V pattern at the end of its mantle. And this octopus is known to mimic the different species of flatfish or flounder in the area. We're going to do a quick stop to the Hawaiian Islands and check out this other octopus that hasn't been fully described either, or doesn't have a scientific name, and it's known as the Hawaiian long-armed sand octopus. It lives in the sand, and it's also known to use that flatfish mimicry. Last stop is back to South Florida, where I do my octopus research on the Atlantic long-armed octopus. This octopus was not included in the lasso group to begin with. However, you can see that it has similar or the same characteristics, so I'm welcoming it to this octoposse. This octopus uses the flatfish mimicry, and scientists have shown that the octopus that use this flatfish mimicry, they do the same posture as the flatfish, as well as the speed and duration of swimming that the flatfish does. The other types of research that I do, or my octo topics, include different types of octopus behavior, looking at their skin microbiome and what keeps them healthy, and octopus genetics. To summarize, for the lasso group, they live in sandy habitats, they're active during the daytime, and they have extremely long arms. This means with the predation pressure of having a lot of predators, they possibly had evolved different types of mimicry, disruptive coloration that you can see in the mimic octopus and wonderpus. And so they may be mimicking toxic or venomous animals, or the octopus may be unpalatable itself. However, we still need to do research to figure this out. They may be masters of disguise, but they also have a disappearing act, like the famous Harry Houdini, the escape artist. These animals can use their long arms and dig down into the sand and quickly disappear from their predators. They're not the only ones doing the mimicking. We have scientists and engineers that use octopus as bioinspiration or for biomimicry for soft robotics. I'd like to say thank you for listening, and if you liked these octo facts, follow me more at the Octo Girl, Octo Nation at the FAU Marine Lab. Thanks.
Thank you, Chelsea. Mimic octopuses are one of those that have spawned so much interest in folks, and but I know that you were talking about all the different things that they mimic, but one of the ones that feel like we're most comfortable saying that that's what that is that flatfish mimic, right? Mm-hmm. And
yes.
But if you're a predator that would eat an octopus, why wouldn't you eat a flatfish? What's the benefit of imitating a flatfish?
That's a great question. So a lot of the octopus predators are fish, which are gape limited. They can only open their mouth so wide. So if you mimic this flatfish, it's a very wide fish that another fish could not eat. So it's a good animal to choose to mimic.
Nice. All right. Well, Chelsea's not going anywhere this time. Now it's time for us to bring all of our speakers back to the Lightning Talk stage for our Q&A conversation. Y'all have been feeding questions into the chat. Don't stop. We're going to try to get to as many as we possibly can. Before we do, though, do any of you all have questions for each other?
I have a question, Aditi.
Sure.
How can you, because they're making the same patterns when they're awake and when they're asleep, how can you actually tell if they're really asleep?
So that's a great question. So I kind of glossed over it, but there are these behavioral criteria for sleep that are conserved across animals. You can ask, like, how can you say a jellyfish is sleeping? Like, there's no way to tell. So there are a bunch of criteria that are common across all animals and distinct from any other state. So if I want to distinguish sleep from, say, unconsciousness, it has to be rapidly reversible. So you should be able to wake someone up from sleep quickly. So we did experiments to test that this was true. Then there has to be decreased arousal. So if I shake you when you're awake, you react. But if I shake you with the same intensity when you're asleep, you may or may not react, depending on how deep asleep you are. So we did these extremely calibrated experiments giving a stimulus to the octopus to test whether this was indeed sleep. And the third one is homeostasis. This, I'm sure every PhD student is familiar with. If you're sleep deprived, you have to catch up on that sleep. You can't just forego that sleep and go on with your life. You have to, it's a homeostatically controlled system. So we did these experiments as well to show that it was indeed fulfilling these criteria of behavioral sleep. And then the neural recordings on top of that showed that it was actually neural sleep as well. So we did have these two distinct stages of sleep that matched the behavior. So altogether, we're fairly confident that it is sleep.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it is. That's something that's really interesting that people kind of associate sleep with, like, quote unquote, more intelligent animals, right? Like that the smarter you are, the more you need sleep because you got a big brain, needs a lot of rest. But you were saying like it's much more conserved across animals, and I think that's something that might have been new information for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it is quite conserved, and every animal kind of sleeps in its own way, so it's quite flexible. And the evolution of two-stage sleep is still a mystery. Like it's anyone's theory at this point. Like we don't have enough information on this. But
yeah, and that's fascinating in its own right? It's something that we do every single day and night of our lives, and it can still be a mystery to us. There is a lot of interest in like the various different kinds of behaviors that people saw in the videos, and CE, one of the ones that has come up a couple of times is that parachute move. Is that a common octopus predatory strategy, or is that something that a few species have specialized? Can you tell us a little bit more about that particular move?
Sure. That is a very common thing across octopuses. However, the frequency with which they do it will vary between species. So that species I showed you in the photograph, that's Octopus briareus, the Caribbean reef octopus, and it does it constantly, almost every few seconds, it seems, as it goes across the seafloor. Some of the other species which don't have as big of a arm web, so they can't really envelop things as well, they won't do it as often, or they won't do it to like rocks and coral heads. But if they see a crab or if they see some other tasty snack, they might jump and pounce and catch it that way. So it just depends on the species.
And Kate, when you're doing enrichments with the octopuses in our care, do you see some of these same predatory behaviors, the parachuting, I don't know, do any of the fish that share the exhibit with our GPO ever get punched?
So we do see similar behaviors, but we actually only house our octopus with other invertebrates, just because if that octopus is a little extra hungry, We don't want them eating a tank mate. But we can actually get that parachute behavior by, I've gotten it by changing the water flow in the exhibit, which I thought was really interesting. So I figured that maybe that incoming water maybe had a different flavor to it. Maybe it passed by some old food that the octopus really liked and they had missed earlier.
Someone was also asking, do you ever use music for enrichment for octopuses?
It's not something we've tried, but octopus have been shown to be sensitive to vibrations. Some facilities have had to actually move octopus in the past if they're having some construction go on. And so I actually haven't tried to do any sort of like vibration enrichment for them.
So vibrations, you know, that's something that certainly affect any underwater animals for sure. You know, Aditi, another thing that's come in around sleep is like how long, because all these animals are going to sleep in different ways, and people have a sense of how long they sleep in a night or in a nap or whatever. Like, how long are the sleep cycles for octopuses?
So it varies. The octopus we chose the sleepiest octopus that we could find since we were studying sleep. We wanted to maximize. So the one I use sleeps for 12 hours a day. Sorry, sleeps for 12 hours a day. Like, it's completely nocturnal. So as soon as the lights come on, it wraps itself up, finds its corner, and goes to sleep. And then does the active sleep almost every hour for the rest of the day. So like 12 hours, 12 bouts of active sleep through the day. But there are other octopuses similar size that have a more like have like 6 hours, and then they nap the rest of the day, like have smaller bouts of sleep. And even when you get the animals from the wild, they take a while to habituate to the new environment, so they're sleeping less, and then so it's a variable thing, but approximately 7 to 12 hours.
So this may be a hard, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this or not, but do you think that your octopuses are sleeping differently in your lab setting compared to how they sleep in the wild?
So this was something I wanted to do, like watching them sleep in the wild and how this happens. But as CE showed in her videos, they're extremely good at going into their dens, and we can just look at them from outside the den. So it's I assume they're going inside the den and sleeping, because this is even their behavior in the lab kind of mimics that. So we give them these little terracotta pots and they slide in there and then go to sleep. So we never had a good look at them in the wild, but we do see them when they're awake, and that's usually at night. So in the daytime, if we go down to the reef, we never see this species particularly. So we're fairly confident it's close to what we see in the wild, but not certainly.
Chelsea, you've certainly spent a lot of time underwater, as have you, CE. Have either of you seen octopuses that you might have interpreted as sleeping?
Yes, definitely. Sometimes I wake them up.
Oh, okay.
And they don't like it. They usually jet water or ink at me as a result.
Interesting.
This is true for the sleep deprivation. They did not enjoy this.
Yeah,
Meg, there's a lot of questions about the. What was that? One more time?
I was just going to mention and commenting that similar answers as CE, like they're usually tucked back really, really far in their dens. And so it's really hard to observe their full body patterns like you can get in the lab. So that's really exciting.
Meg, questions about the RNA and the changes, and people are thinking about it. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but I think there's some search for a little more clarity about those RNA changes. Are they passed down to offspring, or are they sort of ephemeral or just superficial?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, we've seen like 100,000 editing sites, upwards of 600,000 editing sites. Out of all those sites, 5,000 of them have actually been conserved and passed down since the beginning of the coiloid lineage, which is when octopus, squid, and cuttlefish broke off from Nautilus. So they are conserving some of these sites, and they are being passed down. Not all of them, but a good chunk. Way more than any other animal. We don't have any conserved RNA editing sites.
So I read something recently in a book that it was mind-boggling to me, that that octopuses and squid are actually been evolving along separate pathways for like 300 million years, like the same amount of time that birds and mammals have been on divergent pathways. So even though we're thinking of these animals as closely related, they're actually incredibly specialized
Totally.
from that earlier ancestor.
Oh, totally. Like squid and cuttlefish are their own little thing, the decapods. And octopus or octopodes, they're separate. They kind of came around, I think, around the same time, but like they have totally just evolved separately from each other.
Chelsea, speaking of evolved specialized behavior, right? So I know that one of the things when I was talking to Roger and about the mimics and what we think versus what we know about what they're mimicking, it's easy to look at some of that behavior and say, oh, that's a that or that's a that, especially like the image. And I can't remember if it was in your presentation, CEO, or in Chelsea's, where it looked like they're running across the floor of the ocean. And it's easy for someone to see a person in that, like an octopus running and imitating a person. Like, how do you determine whether they're actually mimicking another animal or whether they're doing something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's where a lot of underwater observations and analyzing video comes into play. And so it's just been recently, the early 2000s, that we've actually been able to say there's this group of octopuses that are able to mimic other animals, do the mimicry. And right now we've got that good documentation for the flatfish mimicry, lionfish. But I mentioned that the mimic octopus has been thought to mimic up to 13, but there's not great evidence for that yet. There's some observations to whereas when it's not moving, it could actually mimic like sessile animals like sponges, tunicates, or tube worms. And so, but that's just speculation right now. And so we need a lot more data to figure out if they're actually mimicking these different animals or not. So still a lot to explore.
CE, I've got a question here from Finley and Avery Grace, ages 6 and 4, about their ink. Like, how do they make that ink and where does it come out?
That's a great question. The ink actually uses melanin, which is the same stuff in our skin that when you go out in the sun and you get a suntan, it's actually the compound that causes that darkening. So they have that same compound and they have this little sac inside their bodies. And when they want to squirt some ink, they'll actually release it and blow it through their siphon or their funnel, which is this little round kind of small hose on the side of their head. And they can actually do two kinds of ink release. They can either just release it like a smoke screen, so it just clouds the water and you can't see where the octopus is going. Or more often they'll release it with a little bit of mucus, and that'll actually cause it to hang in the water as a blob and kind of serve as a decoy for while the octopus runs off in the other direction.
Kate, I'm sure our goal in the care of octopuses is not to stress them in such a way that they would ink, but does that happen in our care as well?
It does sometimes happen in human care, and it's actually depending on how much ink they release and the size of the exhibit they're in can cause issues for the octopus themselves. Because in the wild, there's normally currents that carry that ink away. So in human care, a lot of times, like CE said, it'll glob up with that mucus. We can actually siphon it out pretty easily because it's like putting a straw on it and just sucking it right out. But thankfully for us, we have learned how to handle the octopus, and it really doesn't happen all that often currently.
There's a question here also about like when you're thinking about designing new enrichments, and let's say we've got a new octopus in our care. Do you design enrichments specifically for that octopus after you've gotten to know them, or do you cycle through sort of the standard array of enrichment that you already have?
Yeah, so we're constantly getting new enrichment approved for our octopus. And it could be maybe we have one really into feeders and we actually have to make more difficult feeder puzzles for them. But we do always have a backstock of enrichment pieces that we use just because they are so smart. And so we cycle through our stuff pretty often and we just need a really big kind of cache of things to use.
Yeah, so you can't throw the same thing in there every time because they'll get bored.
Yep.
Just like my cat. Not to bring it around there again, but so Aditi, there's a question about like you're using octopuses to study sleep. Broadly, is the neurochemistry, the neurobiology of a cephalopod really close enough to like a person's that it's giving you sort of a good analog of human sleep?
It's not exactly as good a model as say mice at a neurotransmitter level. So there's some neurotransmitters that we have and that our sleep depends on that cephalopods don't have. But the way we are approaching it is that even though the brain is so different, this kind of same emergent property is found in these two brains that are completely differently organized. So as I think Jim mentioned in the beginning, like octopus brains are not very centralized. So what was thought was this two-stage sleep was a feature of these highly centralized brains. So this kind of disproves that even in such a decentralized brain where most of the neurons are in the arms and on like controlling the skin patterns, even in this kind of a brain, it emerges, these two stages of sleep emerge. So we're looking at it more from a structure of the brain perspective rather than like a neuroanatomy perspective rather than a neurochemistry perspective, if this makes sense.
It does, yeah. It's there's so much going on with octopuses and other cephalopods. It's like what I mentioned just at the very beginning, this idea of decentralized activity, that an arm of an octopus might be doing something completely independent of its brain. It's when you all are talking, when someone learns that you study cephalopods, like what's your go-to wow fact about either your work or octopuses or stuff? We say octopuses a lot, but I mean cuttlefish, squids, nautilus. Like what's your go-to wow fact?
That's such a hard question. There's so many facts.
So much.
There's so much.
I didn't ask you what your favorite octopus was. I didn't feel like that was fair.
One fact that I really like is that in the term of colorblind for humans, octopus actually are, just because their eyes operate differently from us. But even with that, they still like perfectly match their surroundings. And so that's a really cool fact that I like.
That's a good one because people are blown away by it.
It's wild to see that happen in real time, right? So I haven't spent anywhere near the time that y'all have spent under the water, but I mean, I've been in the water with octopuses a couple times, seen them like moving, turned away to get somebody's attention, and looked back, and they're gone. Like it's like there's nowhere for it to have gone. Like it didn't just jet off. It's just I'm looking right at it, and I can't see it at all because it's not just color, right? It's texture as well that helps mimic the sort of the habitat around it. It's pretty impressive.
I'm building off of that, the fact that I like a lot for how do they actually color match themselves being colorblind is that they actually have proteins that are commonly found in our eyes called opsins, and they're directly attached to their chromatophores. So they can actually detect the brightness of their environment and automatically respond to that by changing whether or not they're expanding or constricting their chromatophores.
Yeah, Ed Young's, if you all know Ed Young's book, An Immense World, and it's all about the sort of sensory systems of animals. And one of the things they talk about it is that it's impossible for us to appreciate the sensory world of an animal, and especially something like an octopus, because it's so linked to their body, their biology, and in humans we get this thing called synesthesia, where like your senses seem crossed. Whereas, like a sound may have a taste, or a color may have a smell for you. But for an octopus, the fact that they're constantly touching and tasting things at all times, and those opsins are attached in their chromatophores, which are on the same skin surface. So it feels like an octopus's, they call it Umwelt, like their sensory world to us would be baffling.
So overstimulating. So incredibly overstimulating.
All right. Any other favorite octo facts? Chelsea, CE, Aditi, what would you go to?
Yeah, I'd say one of my go-tos is, just talking about octopus behavior and how they can achieve these different postures and their arm flexibility is because octopus have no bones. And so they're super flexible. They're actually made up of different types of muscular hydrostats is what we call it. So other examples of muscular hydrostats are our tongue or an elephant's trunk. So that's why an octopus can fit into tiny spaces. That's why they can twist their arms in all these different directions. So that's a really cool fact I like to share.
Nice.
One thing that I think is really cool is octopuses are one of the few animal groups besides primates that can actually move bipedally. So you saw a little bit of that in that last video on my last slide. But yeah, that's actually something that's been seen in 4 species of octopus, and it's actually probably more common than is known. It just hasn't been seen and recorded yet. But some of the other animals that do that are cockroaches, and there's a lizard that can actually run across water bipedally.
I've seen those.
Cockroach bipedal?
Yes. But other than that, and outside of primates, it's not a very common phenomenon.
I don't think that's helping anybody's sleep patterns tonight.
I'm sorry.
I'm just imagining a cockroach like on its 2 little legs, like.
Yes, we love all the creatures of this diverse world.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a question from the audience. I think it's a good one. Are y'all cephalopodologists? What do you call someone who studies cephalopods?
Malacologist.
There's toothologists, but that refers to tooth is refers most commonly to squid and cuttlefish. So there's kind of like an argument of what do you call yourself if you study octopuses, or if you study all of them, are you still a toothologist? So I mean, I guess you could be a cephalopodologist.
How about krakenologist?
Krakenologist.
Or like cephalogy, but that also feels like, isn't there another thing like that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think toothologist is super helpful, and malacologist, which is study of mollusks, right? I mean that's pretty broad. I mean, you're talking about clams and snails too. I don't know. It's interesting. All right. We are close to the end, but I do have one more question I want to squeeze in if I can. And maybe Kate, maybe this is best for you. We've kind of hinted at it, but do you notice that octopuses have personalities?
There's definitely differences between individuals. I don't want to personify them like too much, but there's definitely ones that are more curious than others, ones that are going to be more cautious around humans. I've had the unique experience working with like 3 GPOs at the same time and seeing that great change between one that was always like, yeah, sure, I'll interact, and then one that was just like, I want absolutely nothing to do with the world of the light. So
is that consistent with other people's experiences with different cephalopods? Aditi, I see you nodding. I suppose you get that they all have different sort of sleep patterns, I suppose.
Yeah, so actually one of the interesting things was each one has this signature style of doing the active sleep patterns, which is stable over time. So even when they're not awake and doing stuff, there is a way to tell them apart, which I thought which is one of the findings we're following up in the lab right now, because it's insane. Like it's wild.
You can tell them apart by how they sleep.
Yeah, because they have the same underlying biology, they have the same pattern repertoire. We come from the same ecology, so there's no way to explain this individual variation except that it's it's there and it's obvious and it's like measurable in this very quantitative way. So
It's very cool.
Well, I think we could probably have this conversation all night, but that's the time we have for this evening. So I want to say thanks again to our speakers. You were all amazing. And, you know, if you all could, our audience could drop some love for them in the chat. I know that they would appreciate it. If you enjoyed tonight's free science event, please do consider a donation to keep programs like Lightning Talks free and accessible for all. Our next Lightning Talks event will be on May 9, and we're excited to delve into one of the most diverse and spectacular regions of the ocean, the Coral Triangle. And who knows, you might get a sneak peek at the aquarium's new Ocean Pavilion expansion, which is scheduled to open this summer. Also, we need your help. Picking topics is hard. There's so many interesting and important topics in ocean conservation. We want your help in picking the final subject for season 4 of Lightning Talks. So check the chat for a link to an audience poll and let us know what you'd like to see. That episode will air on August 8th, and we're excited to learn what you're excited to hear about. Now, voting for the poll will close on May 2nd, and we'll announce the viewer's choice topic at the May 9th edition of Lightning Talks. Of course, don't forget, you can see all of Lightning Talks history on our YouTube channel. And while you're there, click like and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.